Don't let him see you pity him. Those were the first words the head of security said to me before the elevator doors opened on the 43rd floor. His voice was low, almost respectful, but something underneath it felt like a warning people only gave before entering churches or war zones. The elevator chimed softly, and cold air wrapped around me immediately. The penthouse was silent in a way expensive places often were. No television. No music. No conversation. Just the distant sound of rain tapping against floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan like the entire city had been placed beneath glass. I tightened my grip around my therapy bag and stepped inside. Marble floors reflected the dim amber lights built into the walls. Everything looked immaculate. Controlled. Lifeless. Two men in black suits stood near the hallway without moving, their expressions unreadable. Neither of them looked at me directly. That unsettled me more than if they had stared. "Mr. Moretti is in the West Lounge," one of them said quietly. I nodded even though my mouth had suddenly gone dry. Adrian Moretti. I had heard the name before I ever accepted the job. Everyone in New York had. Some people spoke it carefully. Others refused to say it at all. A man who once owned half the city's shipping routes. A man politicians smiled beside in photographs but never mentioned publicly. A man who disappeared 6 months ago after what the news called a tragic accident. The gossip online was darker. Betrayal. Internal war. Permanent damage. I followed the long hallway toward the glow of gray storm light spilling across black marble. My sneakers made almost no sound against the floor. When I finally reached the lounge, I stopped breathing for half a second. He sat near the windows with his back partially turned toward me, motionless in a wheelchair that looked too small somehow for a man built like him. Broad shoulders. Dark hair brushed back carelessly. One hand resting on the armrest while the other remained limp in his lap. Rain slid down the glass behind him, turning the skyline into streaks of silver and smoke. He didn't acknowledge me. Didn't turn around. The room smelled faintly of expensive whiskey and cedarwood, but neither comforted the heaviness pressing against my chest. I had treated veterans before. Men recovering from surgeries. Athletes rebuilding shattered knees. But this felt different. This felt like standing near a wounded animal too proud to bleed in front of anyone. "Mr. Moretti," I said carefully. "I'm Claire Bennett." Silence. The city glowed behind him like another universe entirely. Finally, his voice came low and rough without emotion. "You're late." I blinked at the antique clock near the wall. I was exactly 3 minutes early. "The storm slowed traffic," I answered softly. Another long silence stretched between us. Then he gave a small humorless laugh that barely sounded human. "Excuses already. This should be fun." I swallowed my nerves and stepped closer. Up close, the damage was harder to ignore. The sharpness in his face. The exhaustion beneath his eyes. He couldn't have been older than 38, but grief had settled into him like age. One side of his body remained unnaturally still beneath the charcoal blanket covering his legs. His jaw tightened slightly when he shifted in the chair, and I noticed it immediately. Pain. Constant pain. Hidden behind discipline. He stared out at the rain without looking at me. "You know what everyone does when they walk in here?" he asked quietly. "They look at the chair first." I didn't answer because he was right. "Then they look at me like I already died." His fingers curled slowly against the armrest. "Tell me something, Claire." His voice dropped lower, colder. "Did they hire you to fix me, or just keep me from putting a bullet through the window?" The question settled heavily into the dark room while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the glass, and for the first time since entering the penthouse, Adrian Moretti finally turned his head enough for me to see his eyes. They weren't angry. That would have been easier. They looked empty. Like a man who had already buried himself long before anyone else noticed. I should have been afraid of him. That was the strange part. Every survival instinct I had developed as a woman living alone in New York should have been screaming at me to walk away from Adrian Moretti and never come back. Instead, I found myself staring at the reflection of rain sliding down the massive windows behind him, trying to understand how a man surrounded by power could look so completely abandoned. The silence in the room stretched until it almost became another person standing between us. Then Adrian exhaled slowly through his nose and turned his attention back toward the skyline. "Well?" he asked quietly. "You going to give me the speech now?" I frowned slightly. "What speech?" "The inspirational one." His mouth twisted bitterly. "About fighting. Recovery. Hope. I have heard them all." His fingers tapped once against the wheelchair armrest. "You therapists always sound the same after a while." I stepped farther into the room, setting my bag carefully beside the couch. "Maybe I am not like your other therapists." He gave another soft laugh without humor. "That is exactly what the last one said." Lightning flashed somewhere over the Hudson, illuminating the sharp lines of his face for half a second before darkness swallowed him again. He looked exhausted. Not physically. Soul-deep exhausted. The kind that sleep could not touch. I moved slowly around the front of his chair until I could finally see him clearly. The rumors had not prepared me for this version of Adrian Moretti. His shoulders still carried the natural authority of someone used to command, but pain had hollowed him out around the edges. A scar disappeared beneath the collar of his black sweater. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. One side of his body remained rigidly still while the other held tension like a wire pulled too tight. He noticed me observing him and immediately looked away. That told me more than anything else could have. Men like Adrian did not avoid eye contact unless something inside them was breaking. "I am not here to give speeches," I said softly. "Then why are you here?" The question came instantly. Sharp. Defensive. Like he genuinely wanted an answer. Rain struck the windows harder. I folded my arms loosely against the cold air. "Because someone asked me to help." Adrian stared at the city for several seconds before speaking again. "And if I do not want help, then I still show up tomorrow." That finally made him look at me directly. Something unreadable flickered across his expression. Surprise maybe. Or irritation that I had not backed down. "You are stubborn," he muttered. "Occupational hazard." For the first time since entering the penthouse, the corner of his mouth almost moved like he was remembering how to smile. It disappeared quickly, but I saw it. A tiny crack in all that controlled darkness. My chest tightened unexpectedly. I opened my bag and removed a clipboard. "Can I ask you something honestly?" Adrian leaned his head back against the chair with visible exhaustion. "You are going to anyway. When was the last time you left this room?" His jaw flexed once. Silence. Then, quietly, 3 months. The answer hit me harder than I expected. 3 months staring at rain and skyscrapers. 3 months trapped inside his own body while the rest of the world kept moving without him. No wonder the room felt haunted. I glanced toward the untouched glass of whiskey sitting beside him. Ice melted halfway down the crystal. And nobody thought that was a problem. Adrian followed my eyes toward the drink. "People around me learned a long time ago not to tell me what to do." That sounds lonely. The words escaped before I could soften them. Immediately, tension filled the room again. Adrian stared at me carefully now, studying me the way dangerous men studied exits and weaknesses. But beneath that cold stare, I saw something else. Not anger. Recognition. Like maybe nobody had spoken to him honestly in a very long time. Thunder rolled outside again. Adrian lowered his gaze slowly to his motionless legs beneath the blanket. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded quieter than before. Older somehow. You should leave before you start feeling sorry for me too, Claire. The second week was worse. Not because Adrian yelled or threatened me or made my job impossible. It was worse because he stopped pretending I was temporary. The first few days, he treated me like weather. Something annoying he had to survive until it passed. But by the second week, I started noticing small things. The untouched whiskey glasses disappeared from the lounge. The curtains were open before I arrived instead of leaving the penthouse buried in darkness. Once, I even caught one of the guards downstairs staring at me like I had performed some kind of miracle simply by getting Adrian Moretti to eat breakfast before noon. None of that changed the fact that he hated physical therapy. Again, I said gently, keeping my hand near his elbow without touching him yet. Adrian gripped the parallel bars so tightly the muscles in his forearm trembled beneath the sleeves of his black shirt. Sweat dampened the dark strands of hair near his forehead. Morning light poured through the rehabilitation room overlooking Central Park, too bright for someone carrying this much anger inside him. I said I am done. His breathing sounded uneven. Controlled, but barely. You have been standing for 23 seconds longer than yesterday. Congratulations to me. Sarcasm dripped from every word. I still cannot feel my legs. I ignored the bitterness. Recovery is not linear. Do not give me textbook lines, Claire. His voice sharpened instantly. I paid enough doctors to memorize those already. The room fell quiet except for rain tapping softly against the windows again. New York had been gray for almost a week straight. Adrian adjusted his grip against the bars and tried again anyway. That mattered more than he realized. Men who had truly given up did not keep trying when nobody forced them to. I stepped closer carefully. Shift your weight slightly left. I know how standing works. Clearly not well enough. The words slipped out before I could stop them. For one dangerous second, Adrian froze completely. The guards near the doorway stiffened immediately like they expected the room to explode. Then Adrian turned slowly toward me, eyes dark and unreadable. That was brave, he said quietly. Or stupid. My heartbeat quickened, but I held his stare. You hired me to help you walk again. Not flatter your ego. Silence. Heavy and electric. Then something unexpected happened. Adrian laughed. Not the cold humorless sound from before. A real laugh. Short. Rusted from disuse. But real. One of the guards looked genuinely shocked. Adrian shook his head once under his breath like he could not believe me either. You really do not care who I used to be. No, I answered honestly. I care who you are now. The laughter disappeared from his face almost immediately. His expression hardened again, but this time it looked defensive instead of cruel. He shifted his weight forward to take another step. His right leg dragged slightly behind him. Pain flashed across his features so quickly most people would have missed it. I did not. Stop, I said immediately. You are pushing too hard. I am fine. Adrian. I said I am fine. He tried to force another step anyway. His upper body moved before the rest of him could follow. Everything happened too fast after that. His hand slipped from the parallel bar. The metal walker screeched sharply against the floor. Adrian lost balance instantly and crashed hard onto the polished wood beside the therapy mat. The sound echoed through the room like breaking glass. One of the guards rushed forward immediately, but Adrian snapped so fiercely the man stopped dead in place. Do not touch me. His voice came out raw. Humiliated. I dropped beside him carefully, keeping enough distance not to corner him. Adrian stayed frozen on the floor, one hand braced against the ground while his breathing turned dangerously uneven. He would not look at me. That hurt more than the fall itself. Adrian, I said softly. Look at me. No, the word barely sounded human. Rain streaked the windows behind him while Manhattan blurred silver and gray beyond the glass. His shoulders trembled once before going rigid again. Just leave me here for a minute. And suddenly I understood the truth nobody else in this penthouse seemed willing to say out loud. Adrian Moretti was not afraid of pain. He was afraid of being seen broken. That night, the penthouse felt different. Quieter somehow. Like the entire building was holding its breath after what happened in the therapy room. I stayed later than usual because Adrian refused to let anyone else help him after the fall. Not the guards. Not the private nurse downstairs. Nobody. Pride could be a cruel thing inside. A broken body. By 11:30, rain still covered Manhattan in silver reflections, blurring headlights into streaks beneath the windows. Most of the lights in the penthouse had been dimmed except for the soft glow near Adrian's bedroom suite. I stood at the kitchen counter organizing medication schedules when I heard glass shatter somewhere down the hallway. The sound snapped through the silence instantly. One of the guards looked toward me, uncertain. "I will check," I said quietly before he could move. He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. That alone told me how unusual this situation had become. Men who once would have thrown themselves in front of bullets for Adrian Moretti now stepped aside when it came to me. I walked carefully through the dark hallway toward the partially open bedroom door. Warm amber light spilled across the marble floor. "Adrian?" No answer. I pushed the door open slowly and found him near the windows again, sitting in his wheelchair with one hand gripping the armrest hard enough for his knuckles to pale. A whiskey glass lay shattered near the wall beside him. He did not look at me. I said I wanted to be alone. His voice sounded exhausted more than angry. I glanced down at the broken glass. Good thing I have terrible listening skills. That earned the faintest exhale from him. Not quite a laugh. Not quite irritation either. I grabbed a towel from the bathroom and crouched carefully beside the shattered pieces. The city glowed outside behind him, endless and cold. "You should not clean that yourself," Adrian muttered after a while. "Why?" "Because you pay people to do everything for you. Because if you cut your hand, your boss will be annoyed." I looked up at him then. "You are my patient, Adrian. Not my boss." His jaw tightened slightly at that word. Patient. Vulnerable. Human. I finished gathering the glass and stood to throw it away. When I turned back, Adrian had lowered his gaze toward his legs again. That distant look had returned to his face. The one that made him seem trapped somewhere nobody else could reach. "Pain level?" I asked softly. "Do not start." "Adrian." He closed his eyes briefly before answering. 6. That is higher than earlier. Congratulations. Your observation skills remain excellent. Sarcasm again. But weaker this time. Tired. I stepped closer slowly and noticed his right hand trembling slightly against the armrest. Not fear. Muscle strain. Exhaustion. You pushed too hard today. I know. The honesty surprised me enough that I stayed quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows while traffic moved far below like another world entirely. Adrian swallowed once before speaking again, voice lower now. "You know what the worst part is?" I leaned lightly against the edge of the desk beside him. "What?" His eyes stayed fixed forward. "People think men like me fear death." A bitter smile touched his mouth for barely a second. "That is not true." He flexed his fingers slowly like even that movement irritated him. "I have seen death. I stopped fearing it a long time ago." The room felt smaller suddenly. He inhaled carefully before continuing. "What I fear," his voice caught slightly. "Tiny. Almost invisible. But I heard it." Adrian Moretti stared down at the blanket covering his legs and whispered so quietly I almost missed it entirely. "I am still a man, Claire. Something inside my chest physically hurt hearing that sentence. Not because of weakness. Because of the shame buried underneath it. Months of believing his worth existed only in power. In control. In the body that had once made entire rooms obey him. I moved before thinking. Slowly. Carefully. Until I stood directly beside his chair. Adrian refused to look at me. His breathing sounded uneven again. Waiting for pity maybe. Waiting for disgust. Instead, I crouched down beside him until we were eye level. Close enough to see exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Adrian, I said softly. Look at me. This time, after a long silence, he finally did. For a second, neither of us moved. Rain rolled down the massive windows behind Adrian in silver lines while the city shimmered beneath the storm like something distant and unreal. He looked at me carefully now, guarded in a way that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with shame. I realized then that every person around him probably responded the same way after his accident. Softer voices. Careful smiles. That unbearable look people gave someone they believed was permanently damaged. Adrian was not asking whether he could walk again. He was asking whether he still had value if he never did. I held his gaze steadily. Do you know what I think when I look at you? I asked quietly. His jaw tightened almost immediately. You should not. But I do. He exhaled slowly through his nose, preparing himself for another wound. Fine. Go ahead. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms against my knees so we stayed eye level. I think you are exhausted. Confusion flickered across his face. Tiny. Fast. That is it. No, my voice softened. I think you spent your entire life believing strength only looked one way. Adrian looked away from me toward the rain again. Easy thing to say when your body still works. The words were not cruel. They sounded tired. I nodded once. You are right. I cannot fully understand this. Silence stretched between us before I continued carefully. But I know what it feels like when people reduce you to the worst thing that ever happened to you. That brought his attention back immediately. The room stayed perfectly still around us. Somewhere deeper in the penthouse, I heard the faint hum of the elevator and distant footsteps, but none of it reached us here beside the windows. Adrian studied my face like he was trying to decide whether I was lying. What happened to you? He asked quietly. I smiled faintly without humor. A drunk driver killed my father when I was 16. His expression shifted instantly. Not pity. Recognition. I looked down briefly at my hands before continuing. After that, everyone treated my mother like she was made of glass. And me? I shrugged lightly. People stopped talking to me normally. Teachers lowered expectations. Friends stopped inviting me places because they assumed I was too broken to function. Rain tapped harder against the glass. Eventually I realized something. Adrian stayed silent, watching me carefully. The tragedy was awful, I whispered. But the loneliness afterward was what nearly destroyed us. Something in his face changed then. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice the tension in his shoulders loosen slightly. I reached over slowly and placed my hand against his clenched fist resting on the armrest. Warm. Trembling faintly beneath my fingers. Adrian looked down at my hand like nobody had touched him gently in a very long time. Listen to me carefully, I said. Your legs do not decide whether you are a man. His throat moved hard. I continued before he could retreat behind sarcasm again. The way you protect people does. The way you survive does. The way you keep getting up even when it humiliates you. Adrian stared at me without blinking now. The city lights reflected faintly in his dark eyes. You think standing makes you strong? I asked softly. No. Staying alive after losing everything and still trying again tomorrow. I squeezed his hand lightly. That is strength. He inhaled sharply, then looked away so quickly it almost broke my heart. I realized too late his eyes had turned glassy. Adrian Moretti was trying not to cry in front of me. The powerful man feared across half the city sat in silence beside the storm while emotion tightened visibly in his jaw. Claire, he muttered roughly after a long moment. Please stop looking at me like that. Like what? His voice dropped lower. Fragile in a way I had never heard before. Like I am still worth something. And that was the moment I understood the real damage had never been his body at all. It was the fact that somewhere along the way, Adrian Moretti stopped believing he deserved to be loved once he could no longer command fear. After that night, something shifted between us. Not dramatically. Adrian Moretti did not suddenly become warm or easy to understand. He still carried silence around him like armor. He still woke up angry at the world some mornings. But little by little, the penthouse stopped feeling like a mausoleum and started feeling lived in again. The first sign was the music. I arrived one Tuesday morning carrying coffee from the corner cafe downstairs and froze halfway through the foyer when I heard soft piano playing somewhere deeper inside the apartment. One of the guards near the elevator actually smiled at my expression. He turned it on himself, the man said quietly, almost like he still could not believe it. I walked toward the kitchen slowly, the smell of fresh espresso mixing with cedar wood and rain. Adrian sat near the island wearing a charcoal sweater instead of his usual black button-down shirts. Sunlight spilled across the marble counters, catching silver strands hidden near his temples. For once, the curtains were open wide enough to let the city breathe inside. He looked up from his newspaper as I entered. You are staring. I handed him the coffee cup carefully. You are listening to music voluntarily. I thought maybe somebody replaced you overnight. One corner of his mouth moved faintly. Do not spread rumors. I have a reputation. The small smile that followed surprised both of us. I noticed it immediately. So did he. Adrian looked away first. That became another pattern over the following weeks. Tiny moments. Human moments. The kind that slowly stitched people back together without them realizing it. Therapy sessions improved too, although Adrian still argued through most of them. Again, I said while standing beside him near the parallel bars. You enjoy watching me suffer. Sweat dampened the back of his shirt as he shifted his weight carefully forward. That is how physical therapy works. Feels illegal. Keep moving. His right leg dragged slightly less now. Not perfect. Not easy. But better. Every inch cost him frustration and exhaustion, yet he kept trying anyway. Some days he failed hard enough to throw the towel across the room afterward. Other days he sat silently by the windows refusing to speak for hours. But he no longer quit. That mattered. One afternoon, after an especially brutal session, I convinced him to leave the penthouse for the first time in months. Absolutely not, Adrian muttered immediately when I suggested it. You need fresh air. I have windows. That is not the same thing and you know it. He stared at me flatly from his wheelchair. Claire, there are photographers outside this building every day waiting to catch me looking weak. Then let them. The answer slipped out before I could. Soften it. Adrian blinked once. Excuse me. I crossed my arms. You survived something horrific. Why should you hide because people are cruel? His jaw tightened slightly. You make everything sound simple. No, I stepped closer carefully. I just think you deserve to exist outside this apartment again. The silence that followed felt heavy. Personal. Adrian studied me for a long moment before finally exhaling. 15 minutes, he muttered. You negotiate like an exhausted father. And you complain like one. That earned a real laugh this time. Deep. Brief. Unpracticed. The driver took us downtown just before sunset. Manhattan glowed gold beneath the early autumn sky while traffic rolled endlessly around us. Adrian stayed tense the entire ride, shoulders rigid beneath his dark coat. But when we stopped near a small pizza place in Brooklyn Heights and the smell of garlic and fresh dough drifted through the open windows, something changed in his expression. "You brought me here?" he asked carefully. "You need normal human experiences. I owned restaurants nicer than this. And yet none of them smell this good." For the first time since his accident, Adrian let someone help him outside without looking ashamed. The evening air brushed against his face while the city moved around him naturally instead of staring. A little girl passing with her mother waved shyly at him on the sidewalk. Adrian hesitated before awkwardly waving back. The child smiled immediately and kept walking like nothing about him seemed frightening at all. I looked over just in time to see something soften visibly in Adrian's eyes. And suddenly I realized the city no longer looked like a prison to him. It looked like something he might finally want to belong to again. The nightmares started again 3 nights later. I knew before anyone told me because the entire penthouse changed when Adrian slept badly. The guards spoke quieter. The staff avoided eye contact. Even the air felt heavier somehow, like tension could seep into marble and glass. I arrived just after 7 in the morning carrying 2 coffees and found one of the security men standing outside Adrian's office with a worried expression. "He has not come out," the man admitted carefully. "Since last night." My stomach tightened immediately. "Did anyone check on him?" The guard hesitated. "Mr. Moretti does not like people entering without permission." I stared at him for a second before pushing the office door open myself. The room smelled faintly of espresso and exhaustion. Gray morning light spilled across the massive desk near the windows, illuminating papers scattered across polished black wood. Adrian sat motionless in his wheelchair facing multiple security monitors built into the wall. He still wore yesterday's dark sweater. His eyes looked bloodshot. He had not slept. He glanced toward me briefly before returning his attention to the screens. "You are early. You look terrible." "Good morning to you too." I walked farther inside and noticed one particular monitor enlarged near the center display. My apartment building. Every muscle in my body tightened instantly. Adrian noticed my expression and reached for the remote too late. The screen went black. Silence dropped heavily between us. "Why are you watching my building?" I asked quietly. His jaw flexed once. "Routine precaution." "Adrian." He exhaled sharply through his nose like the truth physically irritated him. "Someone has been asking questions about you." The words landed cold in my chest. "What kind of questions?" Adrian finally looked at me directly. "Questions connected to me." Rain rolled softly against the office windows while traffic crawled below through Manhattan morning fog. I set the coffees down untouched on his desk. "You said your world would not touch me." "I know what I said." His voice darkened slightly. Things changed. Fear prickled slowly beneath my skin, but not because I thought Adrian would hurt me. The terrifying part was realizing he sounded genuinely afraid for me. "Who?" I whispered. Adrian looked away toward the dark monitors again. "Someone from my past who should have disappeared months ago." He rubbed one hand slowly across his jaw, exhaustion visible in every movement. "When I was injured, parts of my organization fractured. Some people believed weakness created opportunity. Meaning men who once smiled at my table started imagining life without me." His voice stayed calm, but something colder moved underneath it now. Controlled anger. Old instincts waking back up. I folded my arms tightly. "And now they know about me." Adrian stayed silent long enough to answer without words. My heartbeat quickened. "This is ridiculous," I muttered. "I am a physical therapist, not a hostage." Claire. The way he said my name stopped me instantly. Low. Careful. Human. Adrian turned fully toward me for the first time that morning, and the exhaustion in his face hit me harder than anything else. You are the only good thing that entered my life after the accident. His voice roughened slightly. Do you understand how dangerous that makes you? The room went completely still around us. I stared at him speechless while rain streaked silver across the windows behind him. Adrian looked like he hated himself for saying it out loud. For admitting attachment at all. I can handle myself, I said softly after a moment. That is exactly what worries me. His eyes lowered briefly toward his motionless legs before returning to mine. I spent my entire life believing I could protect anything through force. A humorless smile touched his mouth. Turns out it only took one hospital bed to prove how fragile everything really is. Something painful twisted inside my chest hearing that. Because beneath the power and money and security teams, Adrian sounded like a man terrified of losing someone again. Before I could answer, one of the guards rushed suddenly into the office without knocking. The man's face had gone pale. Sir, he said tightly. We have a problem downstairs. Adrian's entire expression changed instantly. Cold. Sharp. Dangerous in a way I had not seen before. What happened? The guard swallowed hard before answering. Someone left flowers for Miss Bennet in the lobby. My confusion lasted exactly 1 second. Flowers? The guard nodded once. White lilies. Adrian went completely still beside the dark monitors. Every trace of warmth disappeared from his face. Get rid of them, he said quietly. The room turned colder somehow. Now. And suddenly I understood the real reason fear had returned to this penthouse. Someone out there wanted Adrian Moretti to remember exactly what it felt like to lose something he could not survive without. The next 48 hours felt like living inside a thunderstorm that never fully arrived. Security around the penthouse doubled overnight. New faces appeared near the elevators. Conversations stopped whenever I entered a room. Adrian became quieter too, but it was a different kind of silence now. Focused. Calculating. The version of him that once built empires through instinct and control had started resurfacing beneath the exhaustion. I noticed it in the way people reacted when he spoke. The guard stood straighter again. Meetings behind closed office doors lasted for hours. Men in expensive suits arrived looking nervous and left looking pale. But none of that frightened me as much as the way Adrian watched me now. Constantly. Like every second I remained out of his sight physically hurt him. You are staring again, I muttered one evening while organizing resistance bands in the rehabilitation room. Adrian sat near the windows pretending to read financial reports. Occupational hazard. That does not even make sense. Neither does risking your life to annoy me daily, yet here you are. The corner of my mouth lifted despite myself. That happened too often lately. Even during difficult days, Adrian found ways to pull small reactions from me now. Tiny moments of warmth hidden beneath all the damage. He lowered the reports slowly. You should stay here for a while. The softness in his voice immediately erased my smile. Adrian. I am serious. Rain tapped against the windows while Manhattan darkened outside beneath gathering evening clouds. Until I know this situation is handled, I do not want you alone. I crossed my arms tightly. You cannot lock me inside a penthouse because somebody sent flowers. You think this is about flowers? His tone sharpened instantly. Claire, men like Victor Salazar do not send warnings unless they want fear first. The unfamiliar name settled heavily between us. Victor? Adrian looked away briefly before answering. He was part of my organization years ago. And now? Silence. That was answer enough. I walked closer carefully, lowering my voice. Adrian, I am not afraid of him. I am. The confession came so quickly it stunned both of us. Adrian stared down at his hands afterward like he regretted speaking at all. Not for myself, he muttered roughly. For you. Something inside my chest tightened painfully hearing that. Before I could answer, the lights flickered once overhead. Then everything went dark. The entire penthouse dropped into silence except for the storm outside. My heartbeat jumped immediately. Somewhere down the hallway, voices rose sharply. Adrian's posture changed instantly beside me. Alert. Dangerous. Claire, he said quietly into the darkness. Come here. I moved toward his voice just as emergency backup lights flickered dimly red across the room. The atmosphere shifted instantly from luxurious to terrifying. Security radios crackled somewhere outside the door. Power outage? I whispered. Adrian's expression hardened completely. No, the single word turned cold in my stomach. Then came the sound. Metal striking glass somewhere deeper inside the penthouse. Shouting followed immediately after. My pulse exploded. One of the guards burst through the rehabilitation room doors breathing hard. Sir, they breached the south entrance. Adrian grabbed the arms of his wheelchair instantly. Get Claire downstairs now. No, the word left my mouth before fear could stop it. Adrian turned sharply toward me. Claire. I am not leaving you. Another crash echoed somewhere nearby followed by footsteps and muffled yelling. The guard looked panicked now. We do not have much time. Adrian's jaw tightened violently. Then something happened I will never forget for the rest of my life. He pushed himself forward in the wheelchair and grabbed the parallel bars near the therapy mats. Every muscle in his arms strained visibly as he forced himself upward. Adrian, I whispered in shock. Pain tore across his face instantly. His legs trembled beneath him so hard I thought he would collapse immediately. But he stayed standing. Barely. Breathing unevenly. Furious determination burning in his eyes. The guard stared speechless. So did I. Adrian gripped the bars tighter and took one dragging step forward. Then another. His body shook violently with effort, but he kept moving anyway. Toward me. You are not dying because of me, he said through clenched teeth. Thunder exploded outside the windows as the entire room seemed to hold its breath. And in that moment, I finally understood something terrifyingly simple about Adrian Moretti. Love had done what fear never could. It gave him a reason stronger than pain. By sunrise, the storm had finally passed. Manhattan glowed pale gold beneath the early morning light while the city slowly woke below the penthouse windows. Everything felt strangely quiet after the chaos from the night before. Security teams moved through the apartment with controlled urgency, repairing damaged locks and checking surveillance systems, but the danger itself had already disappeared before dawn. Adrian's people handled the situation without ever letting it reach me directly. He made certain of that. I sat curled at one end of the massive couch near the windows with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and untouched coffee cooling between my hands. Exhaustion pressed heavily behind my eyes, but sleep felt impossible after watching Adrian force himself to stand through pure determination alone. The image would not leave my mind. His shaking legs. The pain carved into his face. The way he kept moving anyway because I was in danger. Soft footsteps crossed the marble floor behind me. I turned and immediately stood up too fast. Adrian. He leaned lightly against the doorway wearing gray sweatpants and a black long-sleeve shirt instead of his usual tailored clothes. One hand rested against a cane now. Not the wheelchair. The cane. My throat tightened instantly at the sight. Morning sunlight spilled across him, softening the sharp edges he carried so naturally. He still looked exhausted. Still pale. But alive in a way I had never seen before. You should be resting, I whispered. Adrian gave me a tired look. You sound like a wife from the 1950s. Despite everything, I laughed softly. The sound surprised both of us. He moved slowly farther into the room, every step careful but real. No guards hovered nearby. No audience. Just us and the quiet city beyond the glass. How bad is the pain? I asked gently. Enough that I will pretend otherwise all day. Adrian. Claire. His voice softened around my name now without him realizing it. He stopped beside the couch and lowered himself carefully onto the cushions with visible effort. I sat beside him instinctively, close enough to feel warmth radiating from his shoulder. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence felt peaceful for the first time since I met him. Not lonely. Not guarded. Just quiet. Adrian stared out at the skyline while morning traffic crawled slowly through the streets below. Victor is gone, he said eventually. He will not come near you again. I nodded once, though honestly the danger no longer felt like the thing shaking my heart. You stood last night. Adrian looked down at the cane beside him. Barely. Still counts. A faint smile touched his mouth before fading again. You know what is strange? He asked quietly. For months after the accident, every doctor kept talking about recovery like it was only physical. He flexed his fingers slowly around the handle of the cane. Nobody told me how humiliating it would feel needing help to exist. My chest tightened painfully. That is because people are terrible at talking about vulnerability. Adrian glanced toward me carefully. You never were. The honesty in his voice made it difficult to breathe suddenly. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap before answering softly. You know why? Why? I met his eyes then. Because I never saw you as weak. Something vulnerable flickered across his expression immediately. Raw. Unprotected. Adrian looked away too slowly this time. Claire, he murmured roughly. You changed my life. I shook my head gently. No, my voice almost broke. You fought for it yourself. Sunlight stretched farther across the penthouse floor while the city brightened outside. Adrian sat beside me quietly for a long moment before finally reaching over and taking my hand carefully into his. No fear. No hesitation. Just warmth. Human and real. His thumb brushed softly across my knuckles once before he whispered, I spent so much time believing I stopped being a man the day I stopped walking. Emotion tightened visibly in his jaw. Then you walked into my life and treated me like I was still worth seeing. My eyes burned instantly. Adrian Moretti lowered his forehead briefly against our joined hands and exhaled shakily like even now he could not fully believe someone stayed. You never lost your worth, I whispered back. You only forgot it for a while. The city continued moving outside the windows beneath the morning light, loud and restless and alive. But inside that quiet room, for the first time in a very long time, Adrian Moretti no longer looked like a man surviving his life. He looked like someone finally ready to live it again.